Thanks everybody for joining us today. We have Mike and Chris with us here from Prodoscore, and they'll be talking to us about how and why to build sales performance assessments into your sales strategy. Chris and Mike, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Jason. And everybody hear me okay? See if we can hear that chat right now. So everyone, thank you guys for joining us today on this webinar. Very excited to be here. I'm excited about the content we're about to present to you. And, you know, more importantly, I'm really excited about having Mike, who's on the call, who, in my opinion, you know, I come from the product side of ProtoScore. In my opinion, Mike is probably one of the, you know, one of the greatest sales leaders I personally have met in my career, you know, working in the tech sector. And, you know, I value him a lot. I think he knows a lot about how to manage these sales teams and, you know, the challenges and the, you know, the tribulations that lie, you know, when managing a sales team and how to drive revenue and how we can incorporate data and, more importantly, assessments into our overall sales strategy. So, Mike, you want to introduce yourself, say hi?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, so with that being said, let's get started. So, you know, going forward, Mike, you know, we always talk about, you know, these sales teams, and I always felt like, you know, when ProtoScore, there's an aspect of intuition that, you know, we have to understand, like, you know, who are these people that are working for us? So my question for someone like you, given before ProtoScore and early in your days, how are you really measuring your salespeople besides a quota? Like, how well did you really know these people and their work ethic?
Yeah, I think, you know, I come from, you know, a few different types of sales environments, right? Whether it was, you know, solutioning to the small business or to the enterprise. And, you know, a lot of the time how we would assess performance, right, is very traditional. How we would keep score is percent to quota, right? How are you tracking on your quarterly number, your yearly number? And, you know, it shows the end result, right? So we would measure performance on the end result, but, you know, how do you drive the activity to get to that end result? And you know, with the technology nowadays, we really have visibility into things we couldn't do back in the day to analyze that information.
So I mean, that's a great question. So, you know, everybody in the sales world, we always talk about quota, right? We're always talking about quota, and this is how we measure our sales reps. But what happens when these sales reps don't attain that quota, right? And I'm curious, like, how many of these sales reps actually attain quota? I mean, I always hear sales leaders are always struggling to hit quota. So what is everybody doing? And then how do you answer those types of questions?
Well, I think, you know, the key is replication, right? I mean, I think it's in a lot of organizations, you know, 70 to 80% of the revenue comes from, you know, 20% of your reps, right? That type of ratio. And it is reality, right? And you really got to look at how do you get the folks that are putting in the activity and that just need coaching and coach them up to those top performer pieces, right? And now with all the tools and technology out there, you have so much more visibility to take advantage of. Versus, you know, having remote employees that you don't see for, you know, 15 days and knowing what they're doing on a daily basis to achieve the goals.
Oh, absolutely. So what do we got on our next slide? So, you know, given that, you know, there's all these pipeline management tools out there and there's all these metrics for, you know, pipeline management and, you know, how we actually measure salespeople from a growth rate, like, I mean, what does all this mean, Mike? Like, you know, you've been through all these classes and all these things that companies put you through. I mean, like, what does this mean?
Yeah, I think, you know, how we measure sales performance a lot of the time is, you know, we'll utilize our CRM, right? We'll utilize the CRM and whether it's engineering or sales engineering or sales operations, you know, they build all of these different reports for us, right? I can recall the days, you know, 3-4 years ago, right, where we're using Salesforce and I'd have to sift through, you know, 10 to 15 different sales reports to really get a true measure of my team's performance, right? So it's, you know, as a sales leader and you're trying to measure performance, I think what a lot of folks that haven't ran sales teams and driven revenue is we wake up every morning and we're thinking, where's our next deal coming from? What opportunity can I assist with to drive revenue to hit goals? And a lot of the time we get moving so quickly that you unfortunately, you don't have time to block off an hour to analyze your CRM data to put coaching into action.
Makes total sense. So with that thing, going on, like the 5 media insights, from a sales assessment, like what are those 5 things? So what are those things that we can use to assess our salespeople better besides quota?
Absolutely. So we do these assessments, right? And you want to kind of analyze the business, right? And one thing we've seen with the assessments that we take is the remote worker, right? I've done quite a few of these now where you actually the leader is actually surprised to see that their remote employees or on the days that they're allowed to work remote actually have higher activity than the days they come into the office, right? I had personal experience when I was running a team using ProtoScore where the office was in the suburbs in Chicago, and I had folks that would sit in traffic to get to the office, but it was very traditional of me to be the beehive environment where I want to, the bumblebees come to the hive, right? I want to see my folks. And after taking the assessment, I actually saw higher activity performance from those folks remote than I did when they were in the office, right? So when you're looking at sales assessment, how are the remote employees activity compared to the office employees, right? And things have just changed these days, right? Enabling a remote workforce, we have the technology now. 5-10 years ago, it was much harder to work remote because of not everything was in the cloud, right? So with the different tools and everything being remote, it's interesting to see when you take the assessment, who's more productive, the office employees or the remote employees.
So Mike, you see remote working is just going to keep growing. Like, I mean, you were hiring young salespeople out of college. I mean, do they expect to work remotely? I mean,
Well,
or do they expect to be in an office?
there's a challenge, right? Like, like I said, I came from that type of environment, right? Where I wanted to see my sales folks, right? I wanted to see them every day, make sure they got their day started on time, and so forth, right? But so it's interesting, right? Because a lot of the companies we're meeting with certain executives, and they're used to that type of cadence and culture. Where now, if you talk to the employees, right, like you said, the recent graduates, the millennials, they want the remote work, right? So it's a kind of a conflict between the two, and it's definitely an interesting topic.
All right, so let's look and see like these. Okay, so here's another thing. So when you're doing these assessments, obviously a lot of the things around adoption come into play, right? I think it's like the number one thing we hear about sales teams is, obviously they're not using their CRM, they're not using their phone system, they barely use their email collaboration software that the company spent all so much money to move over to, and they're barely using that. So, like, Mike, how do you get people to use these tools?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I was with a client yesterday, right? And he asked the question, of all the companies you meet with, right? Because you're really ProtoScore's in the center of the spoke, right? So I'm talking to customers about their unified communications, their office suite tools, their CRM, right? And he was asking about CRM adoption, and of the number of companies that we meet with, how many bring up, adoption issues, and primarily a lot of our customers are Salesforce, right? How many, what's the adoption rate? And I would say on 80% of the meetings we run, there's typically an adoption issue to get folks to use the CRM, right? And what I found to drive adoption, right, is, again, technology is so much more advanced, right? So even at ProtoScore for my sales professionals, everything's automated, right? So you have the ability to get your emails, your phone calls, all those different pieces of activity types would typically you'd have to do manually, automatically get in there, right? So it's a beautiful thing when you build that type of synergy, because you get all the stuff in your CRM and you drive the adoption right out of the system.
Yeah, and I'll give this one other interesting fact. I don't know if I ever told you the story. There was a company, large company, a lot of Salesforce licenses, And she was telling us, the Salesforce admin was telling us that she audits the licenses every month, and she just cancels licenses for people who haven't logged in. And these are people who are supposed to be logging in to the CRM, and they're just not. And her job every month is to look and audit those licenses and turn off the ones that are not being used or no one's logged in for the past 30 to 60 days. So, it's a challenge, especially when you're spending a lot of money on this software.
Absolutely.
So this is one that I really think that you can attest to, Mike, is, think about your best sales employee, right? Your best guy, number one sales rep. Most people don't ever mess with the number one sales rep. They just leave them alone. Then one day, out of nowhere, didn't even see it coming, he sends you that email or you get that phone call, and he tells you, he's like, dude, I'm gone. See you later. And you get blindsided. And you didn't even know it was about to happen. And the data was there the whole time that this guy, something was going on with this guy, but you couldn't see it. Imagine what you could have done if you could have prevented your best sales guy from leaving, and think of how much it's actually going to cost the company now that he's left. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, again, like I said, a lot of sales leaders, we get moving, right? We're shaking trees for revenue, right? And a lot of the time and a lot of our energy is sometimes spent with our bottom performers, right? Especially from an activity inspection perspective, right? And what I really love about ProtoScore and the assessment, right, is it gives you the ability to have an indicator of activity, right? So typically what we see with top sales professionals that attrit the organization is it would be a number of things that build up, right? It could be bad installs with the customer experience. It could be potentially the manager. There's a lot of different things that could lead to that, and it festers, right? And those top sales professionals start interviewing. And typically when they do those things, if we all think when we change jobs and we're ready to make a move, right, your activity drops, right? And what I love about ProtoScore is the indicator, right, where you can see performance drops and be able to have that coaching conversation with that sales professional, right, where you can sit down with them, how's it going, and hopefully you uncover those challenges that they're having, and you can resolve them, and you see performance pick right back up, right? Because there is nothing worse for a sales leader than their top sales rep, getting that email or that phone call that they're leaving the organization, and it's so hard to save them at that point.
And you could have, and the data signs were there. Like, that's the funny thing, is like the data is in there. It's hidden, and we just don't know how to access it.
Totally.
That kind of leads us to the next kind of segment. All the data is there, and that's what's so funny, is like we have all these different systems. We have communication, we have CRM, we got email collaboration, and each and every one of those cloud repositories lives a reporting system that it's hard to pull all this data together, and let alone a sales leader who they don't have time to ingest and digest these different types of metrics and what they mean, and then come up with a consensus. For those who's ever played with spreadsheets, it's not easy. So how do we make things easier from a visibility standpoint, and more importantly, how do we make people better? Because the data is there, and at the end of the day, it's like, how do we make people better?
Yeah. I think a lot of organizations, right, you have the top sales professional, and the sales manager is always, why can't you be more like Johnny, right? And it's just always been hard to know, what does Johnny actually do to on a daily basis, and be able to replicate that, right? And like you said, the data is there, but how do you visually see that, right? And so I found that to be one of the best coaching things, is to actually see what the activity that's taking place, what tools they're using, what's their outreach look like, to be able to better coach that sales professional to get to the next level, to be that A player that you're looking for. But you need the visibility, because going through all the different reports in Salesforce and things like that, it's very challenging to be able to figure out what that recipe is to replicate the performance.
And more importantly, it takes a lot of time for you. I mean, think about all the things that you do as a sales leader. Like, do you really have time to aggregate and ingest all this data and try to make sense of it. Like it's
Yeah,
data
no, you're right.
overload.
I mean, how many, like, exactly, like, that top A person, do I have the ability to go in and pull reports out of their phone system, pull reports out of Salesforce? Yes, you can, right? Obviously, you can do all that stuff, but you just don't have the time for it.
So, I mean, and then if you have that data, and imagine if that data is presented in a format that makes sense for you. I mean, what kind of improvements could you make? Like, I mean, think about it. Like, could you, like, for instance, I'll give you an example. Like, could you tell them when to make calls? So if you see a sales rep, he has more success, he's making calls at this time of the day versus this time of the day, or he sends his emails. The data is all over the place, and it's hard to visualize the data. So you could actually take this data to help improve process, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. When you're having the most success, when are we getting the best return on the appointments, things like that? Absolutely. So.
I mean, that's where we see the process improvement can really change a business. It's like, but again, the data is hidden, and it's hard for us to visualize the data.
Well, it's a simple, the key is scoring, right? I mean, everything in the world today that we simplify, right? I'll give you an example, Chris. Like if you wanted to go buy a house right now, right? What would it, and I'm going to loan you 500 grand. What am I going to go to?
You're going to go look at my FICO score.
I'm going to look at your FICO score. Exactly, right. And what's a FICO score made up? Thousands of data financial points on yourself, right? Into a simple score to digest. So, think of what a sales professional does and how much activity they put in a week, right? With the number of emails, office docs, Salesforce activities, right? You're talking about thousands of activity points put into a simple score, right? For you to digest, and then you can dig deeper, right?
No, it makes total sense. So are you going to show us any of this stuff, Mike, or what are you going to
do? Yeah, let's take this thing for a test drive here. So let me dive into what ProtoScore is here and spend 5-10 minutes and give a high overview of the product, right? So the technology allows us to take in all the activity points, right? So you'll tie into phone calls, you'll tie into the Office suite, right? Google, either Google or Microsoft will look at calendar time, emails, doc revisions, right? Everything that a sales professional does on a day, we're going to tie into, right, and pull all those different endpoints together via an API, which is nice, Chris, because you're able to just simply pull the data in, and the end user has no, doesn't have to do anything, right? So we're just pulling the data out of the system, and then we're compiling scores, right? So you can see here, I have it set for this week from 8/12 to 8/14. I'm able to see our, this version is actually our version that we use at ProtoScore for our 8 sales professionals. And I can see I've got 6 above average, and then I got 2 within average. And good thing is I don't have anyone below average, right? So what's really nice here, especially for the organizations that are larger, when I used this product previously, I had 50 sales professionals scattered all over the country, and I was easily able to digest within a few seconds, what I needed to do and where I needed to talk to my leadership about training and coaching opportunities. So you've got this high level view, right? And then what we can do is we can dive deeper into each sales professional, right? So what I'm looking at here is Pat on our team, right? From 8/12 to 8/14, and we're analyzing his number, right? So what I can see here is Pat was an 82 score, and he's actually done the exact same amount of activity as the 3 previous days to these 3 days, right? So you see a 0% increase, right? So you see nice numbers there. And then what you've got, right, is I'm selected on Wednesday, August 14th. I'm able to digest all the different data points, right? So I've got all his Google Drive activity if he was in slides or docs. I can pull in the different chat lines. I've got his SMS tied to his Ring Central business phone system. I've got 300 Salesforce activities. So when you talk about an adoption perspective, you can see we built everything we do out of Salesforce, and he had 300 different interactions on Salesforce. He sent 46 emails, right? 34 minutes of phone calls, right? And then I'm really, driving home the Salesforce chatter initiative on our opportunities and so forth. So when you're looking at this, you've got all the different data points, And what we do is we put it on I want you to think like an EKG line, right? Like the heartbeat of an employee, right? So you can see here, we can see when Pat started his day and then his productivity throughout the day, right? He's even, doing some extra, hours later there. But as you're looking here, you can see what tools he's using, right? I can see he's in Salesforce. He's in Salesforce. He's sending emails. He's collaborating on chat, right? Chat some more. He's sending out, he's in Salesforce again. And you can see the flow throughout the day. He's making phone calls here, and you can see the flow throughout the day, and finally have all that visibility that the technology gives us. So
Mike, what kind of patterns can you gauge from this? Like, I mean, what can you tell? Like, what time he's waking up, what time he goes to bed? I mean, like, what can you tell if there's gaps in the middle of the day?
Absolutely. So this is, again, this is the deep dive into it, Chris. What I look at every morning, right? I'll show the email of what I get in the morning, but the report I go into is going to be this one, right? This is all of my sales team here. I've got their scores here, and then I'm benchmarking the performance versus where they were at the previous 3 days, right? We had some challenges with Martin last week, right? And had a good coaching session with him, and you can obviously see a large uptick this week, right? Which is a really nice use case. But you could see performance has been pretty good, right? However, when you'll see this sometimes, and you see 30, 40, 50% decreases here, that's really where you want to have that coaching conversation with the sales professional and just do a check-in to temp check them, right? How, again, Chris, we're pulling in thousands of data points, right? How could you, what I've always loved about it is I can digest this screen in about 5 seconds, right? And from there, I go into action and coaching with my sales managers.
Makes sense.
So this is your employee view, which shows them, and then you got your percent plus minus decrease there. Now, Chris, we do correlation. So we use Google's natural language, right, which allows us to process tons of words and keywords, right? So since we're tying into all these applications, I can actually see what's trending across my organization. So think of like a hashtag for your business. If it's trending with a hashtag, right, it goes to the top and it scores higher, right? So you can see here, batting average, Chris, is what I have the team focused on, right? So this week in prospecting, right, they are, we like to compare Prodoscore to, analytics in like, the sports movie Moneyball, right? Where you're taking in tons of analytics, tons of data, and you're utilizing those statistics to obviously build sales teams, right? Or build sports teams. And we've taken that kind of concept and that messaging. What's great is I did a training on it last week, and I can actually see that's our highest trending topic are things around batting average, sports organizations, right? WAR, which is the big analytics that baseball teams use, right? So I could see all that trending right in my correlations here. And then I can actually see who's talking about it, right? Which sales professionals really digesting it, right? Like I'm looking at this now, I don't see Will on here, right? So in my head, I'm thinking, is Will talking about this? Is he driving it? Maybe that's a coaching conversation, as well as I can see what product that it's being talked about in, right? So you can even see some of these have phone calls and stuff like that, since we transcribe those. So some really cool stuff there.
So Mike, you said this pulls in conversations from phone calls as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're on one of these, if we're on a phone call here, we can actually dive in and dive into the call, and you'll see in some of these, we'll actually transcribe the phone call, Chris. So we'll record it, transcribe it, and then we'll pull keywords out of it.
So that's how that's how you pull all the data from correlation. So that way you can see what's trending.
Exactly. So we can take in any language or any wording or any words in emails, chats, documents, phone calls, Salesforce notes. We take all that in and we do correlations on what type of things are trending across your organization.
And this helps you because this helps ensure that the guys understand the messaging, or that they're pushing what you need them to push from a sales leader standpoint. So it helps give you that visibility, like, hey, they understand the message, they're using the messaging that we're teaching them.
Absolutely, right. I mean, you come out with a new promotion or a new product, it allows, that to make sure that that's trending across the organization, which it should be, right? Because a lot of the time when you launch a new product, there's been a ton of investment that went into that, and you just want to make sure that the feet on the street are delivering the correct message.
That's awesome.
Context outside domain or outside of organization. This will be basically who's your team talking to outside of your organization, right? So you can see different significant scores on certain things here. You can see what they talked about and who talked about it as well. So you can see this guy's put a lot of effort into this contact this week. In just the last 3 days, 22 interactions with this individual.
That's amazing.
Here's the bread and butter for me, right? Is you wake up in the morning, again, you want to digest thousands of pieces of information, right? All very simple, right? I could open this email, look at it in 5 seconds and talk to my sales leaders and go from there, right? So you can see we've got some nice increases, and then everything else isn't really jumping out as too big of a red flag at this point. But sometimes you'll see 30-40% decreases here, and that's when you want to get with your sales leader as soon as possible.
And you get this every morning in your email, Mike?
Every morning. Yep. Correct. So I think that touched on most of the points that I wanted to cover. I know we're coming up on the 3:30 here. Turn it back over to you, Jason.
Sure. So we've got a couple of minutes here. Obviously, we'll hang around for anybody that has any questions. But if anybody has any questions for us, pop it in the side panel, and we'll answer those real quickly for you.
Yeah, that was a great presentation, Mike. So I appreciate having Mike here again. In my opinion, one of the greatest leaders. And Mike, one question I have before ProtoScore, like, how does having the visibility change from what you were doing before? Like, how did you have visibility? Like, how are you gauging like what people were doing before versus ProtoScore post? Like, how does it change the way you see things? Like, if I took it away from you, would you feel like you're naked without it, or like what?
It's an interesting thing, right? I mean, as a sales leader, and again, I've worked with some of the people on the team now. I've worked with them for a long time, right? And even when I was using this tool at another place, I worked with sales professionals for 6-7 years, right? And even then, when maybe numbers are not being hit or results aren't being hit, right? You wonder what they're doing on a daily basis, right? And it is nice to have a reassurance that that the activity is being put in on a day-to-day basis, and that it's just something else that you need to work on with that professional. Because I think as a sales leader, when results are not being hit consistently, we always go the other direction of, oh my gosh, John's not working today, right? And you start thinking those thoughts, right? Where that equation's been taken out of my I don't have to worry about that anymore. I have the visibility, and when you're running a sales organization of 30 to 50 employees scattered all over the country, you do think about those things when you're under the pressure to hit results.
And speaking of activity, really quick, does it correlate with revenue? Do you find, Mike?
Yeah, most of the assessments we do, right, it does correlate. It's always, the first part of the assessment that I like to do once we've jumped on the call with the customer to review their results, right? Because they're the only ones that can see their information, right? So when we jump in, and the first thing we do is we go to the employee list view right over here, sales, sort it by ProtoScore right here, and the first question I ask is, are these your top sales professionals? And it hasn't failed me yet, right? From that perspective. So that usually will correlate the two.
Cool. Mike, we've got a few questions from the audience here. So one is, does ProtoScore track only emails that have been sent, or do you track and give insight into emails received as well?
Chris, you want to take that from a product perspective?
Yeah, I can take that. Yeah, from a product perspective. So good question. So we only track emails sent because from an activity standpoint, that takes work to compose and send emails. We have ways of looking and identifying bulk emails versus manual emails. And now with all the new spam filtering laws, and Jason, our marketing guy who's on the phone, can attest, a lot of these bulk email systems, they're catching it and they're putting it in spam. And now you got to manually send emails. If you want to get these emails into the inboxes, you got to manually write them, sometimes for the most part. So manual sending emails, big part of the scoring system. Receiving an email, there's not a lot of work in getting an email, right? So we don't really care about the in-mail. Hope that answers it.
And then we have one on weighting of different activities. So somebody's asking if they wanted to adjust how ProtoScore is weighting activities. For instance, if they see CRM activity as more important, do they have the ability to be able to go in and fine tune or adjust the scale of the weight?
Absolutely. Yes, we do have a feature set where we do offer customers to custom weight the product, but our weighting system out of the box is pretty accurate, but we do give the option if they want to use their own weighting.
A point there too, Chris, is the roles, right? So you do have different roles in organization, right? An inside sales professional, an outside sales professional. They benchmark themselves against those roles, right? So, you see my team here, right? They're all doing the same activity. However, if I had inside sales guys, they might be doing more phone calls, right? They would be in a different role to kind of benchmark the two as well. So everyone does different activities, and then they benchmark themselves against each other.
Well, we got one more here. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between using a tool like ProtoScore versus, just standard or custom reporting in CRM like Salesforce?
Yeah,
I think. Want to take that?
Yeah, no, we get that a lot, right? Is like, customers and prospects will think we're a CRM, right? Where it's unique, right? Because we have to educate our customers a lot, right? Because there's not many visibility tools out there that score, right? So usually we're going in and having to educate the customer on what we are and how we score. So we do get, are you a CRM? How is it? And it's different. We're the center of the spoke, right? So if all your CRM data is pulling into us, your phone data, your office suite tools, right? And then the beauty of how we're different is it's compiling all that data, benchmarking against the peers and so forth, and it's outputting one simple score. A CRM, like I talked about, you could sit in that thing for an hour looking at reports to try to dissect where you have challenges, right? From an activity perspective, and having the tool compute all the data for you and provide you a score, we're visibility, and then you obviously, from that point, you could dive into your CRM, but we're your first point of entry into coaching, indicators, that type of thing.
All right, great. Let's see. We got one last one, and then we'll wrap it up here. Somebody's asking, if they wanted to do a deeper dive demo or have additional questions, who can they ask? I can follow up with that one. So like I mentioned at the start of the webinar, we'll be sending out an email following the webinar with a link to the recording as well as the deck. You can reply directly to that email, ask any additional questions you have, or if you're interested in scheduling a one-on-one demo or for a deeper dive, just reply to that and we'll get back with you.
And the assessments are free. Just, we're doing complete free assessments. Let us do an assessment of your sales team. It doesn't cost anything. And I'm telling you, when you see the data, and once you have this tool, you'll never go back. It's just one of these must-have tools. Once you have it, you're going to use it.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Chris. And we will be in touch shortly with links to everything. And like I said, don't hesitate to reply to that if you've got any additional questions for us.